Paul.
I'm Andy.
And we're from Something&Son. We're going to talk through some of our projects, which will hopefully give you a feel for, I suppose, the philosophy around the way we work, and also hopefully start some discussion around ideas of works we might have for Istanbul. Just to start with, I suppose, fundamental to all of our projects are community, activism, and the environment. And we try to weave these in through our artworks, ideally ending up with something permanent that carries on before the artwork has been created. So almost a continuation or a sustainable artwork that lives perhaps forever. And you'll see that hopefully through how we approach our projects and how we try to weave up our ideas into the everyday, rather than them being something that someone can choose to go and see. They tend to be something that gets woven into the fabric of the places in which they take place. The first project we'll discuss is something called the Barking Bathhouse, and this was a very, very big and very difficult project that we undertook in the summer of the Olympic Games in London.
So the project took place in Barking, hence the name. Barking is in Zone 4 of London, so it's relatively far out. It's on the borders of Essex, which is the county that joins onto London. It's quite a challenging place. About 20 years ago, the whole community was pretty much white people, and now it's pretty much no white people. And it's changing a lot, and it's quite poor. And we wanted to do something that people felt they could have some kind of relationship with, and not necessarily know it's an art project. I think that's a key thing of our work. You don't necessarily know it's an art project. We really want to ingrain it into the everyday. There was a bathhouse in Barking, but that got shut down in the 1980s and is now demolished. And we found this out, and we wanted to try and revive that culture within Barking. London used to have bathhouses all over the place, and they were generally for poor people who couldn't afford to go to spas. And we wanted to do a spa, but make it affordable like the bathhouses were.
There's a long culture in the UK of the working men's bathhouse, which was a place where people who might be working in factories or other things, when we had an industrial base, would go along and bathe together. And this is obviously a culture that still exists in Turkey, exists in Korea, in Japan, and in Sweden and the Nordic countries. But in the UK, there's no longer any social spaces which aren't related to drinking. There's not this kind of middle ground of a space that you can sit and be in people's company and actually relax. And what that's been replaced by is what we kind of see as a self-indulgent form of spa going and bathhouses, which is based around luxury. So you go and have a sauna, and you use a gold towel, and platinum taps, and suddenly you feel rich and special. And actually, it's moved away from being about the way that we look after ourselves and our kind of inner peace and happiness and well-being, and it's become something which is materialistic. And so our project was attempting to address that by bringing the act of getting hot, going in a spa, soaking, relaxing with people, back to its roots as a very simple concept.
A communal concept as well. So these were the initial drawings that we did for the space. It was one building, but it was multiple one building made up of multiple buildings that congregated around one long corridor. So we had to sort of envisage each of the buildings, and because each building had a different type of space and experience, and it was trying to get across the sort of complexity behind the project through drawing.
And I think part of our process again is to draw in very great detail at the outset of a project. So we've never designed a building before, and a spa bathhouse required a building to be built, and so we just sketched it, and then from that came the architectural plans, came all the actual physicality of it. But it always starts with something very detailed. I think this form of drawing actually helps you think about the idea maybe 2 steps ahead of other ways of using CAD or of using other methods.
And the good thing about drawing is that, unlike a CAD image, people don't necessarily take it as the final design, because there's always challenges, there's always something that goes wrong, and it allows that bit of adaptability to come.
So, having drawn this drawing and had the very scary realisation we had to turn it into an actual project, having never done a building or something of this scale, we started to get a team together around this idea of and this vision of a community spa. And so we put out a call into the local area to say, come along, this is an open construction site, get involved, work with us. And we also sourced people from local health and beauty colleges who were learning to be manicurists or stylists. And then most of all, we get into the projects ourselves. So Andy and I painted all of the roof, we made it waterproof, we learned the construction skills, and we kind of immersed ourselves in the process.
And went insane.
And went insane, yeah. It was very difficult. But we became part of the construction community, of the making community in doing this. Again, I guess back to how we create these communities, this started with an idea of, wouldn't it be nice to have bathhouses in the UK and different forms of space? It ended up with us employing, or actually not employing, but creating a place for employment of 5 beauty therapists. And so from our artistic budget, we basically put an open offer in the local paper that anyone who wanted to set up a spa business could operate from our spa for free, and we would give them £1,000 to get started. And with that, they could buy their own equipment, they could get their own business cards printed, they could start to become, realise their dream of having their own business. And so we were able to get a fantastic team of people together who were all entrepreneurial and all motivated in the right way to do this.
So this was the overall design for the space. We wanted to make it a multiple experience, because one of the challenges was that bringing people from central London out to Barking. So it couldn't have just been a 20-minute experience. It needed to be half a day experience. So that's why we designed all these different spaces, and you could sit in there for half a day quite happily, and just pay £2 to get in if you were local, or £5 if you were from outside of Barking and Dagenham, the borough that it was based in.
Yeah, and that's our hand-painted sign, which was meant to evoke the industrial heritage of the area. It's quite a large building. This is why it was so terrifying. And also, it was important for us at the start that when we produced this space, it wasn't just about bathing. It was about communality, and we introduced essentially a kind of cafe-type space where we had music, we had comedy, we had various other interpretations of the ideas of well-being. So instead of having a treatment of the back rub, maybe you laugh for 2 hours, or you kind of listen to music and hang out with friends. And so it became very much a communal space, which was the only space of its type in that area.
And when we conceived the idea and start designing it, we also design the people that go in it. So we make sure that the person that is at front of house smiles a lot. And we just do simple things like that, because it just means it just helps make it accessible to as many people as possible.
And this ended up with being occupied by people. We managed to trick people into sunbathing on gravel. You'll see here, this is essentially a group of young people from the area who were coming down. We had an amazing group of people. I mean, we were getting lots of Polish men hanging out with Pakistani women in the sauna. Lots of young people, old people, incredible conversations in this very, very strange space. People, I think, having sex in the showers, doing lots of, there was lots of craziness. It was not your normal sort of space. It was communal, and it was unusual and kind of quite fun to be around. Part of our inspiration for the design came from, I suppose, the idea that an empty warehouse had been left and it had been taken over by the natural space. There's definitely a perception in the UK that you only come out in the countryside when it's sunny, when the sun's shining, and everyone gets their legs out as soon as the first ray of sunshine comes out. We wanted to get people to re-engage with nature in the space, and so we had, for example, this was our relaxation room. the only place you could sit if you weren't in the sauna, and you would have to go out if it was raining and kind of sit in the rain. And everybody sat in the rain and was very, very happy. And so again, it's trying to get things back to their fundamental, back to the basics.
And then, so the staff used every available space, and this was a little room on the side of the corridor that allowed, we turned into a massage space. And yeah, everything was supposed to feel quite industrial, because there's a perception in the UK that you go to the spa and it's more for women rather than men, so we wanted to make it more of a manly experience, but open to all, basically. So this was sort of based on crates being left within the warehouse, but it was also a wood burning stove for the sauna. And this was an industrial freezer that we put within the building, and it was you went in there and it was basically ice all the way up the wall, ice on the floor. The ice wasn't supposed to be on the floor, but there was ice on the floor, and it got down to, what was it, minus 12?
Yeah, minus 12.
Minus 12, and then you went back into the sauna.
And I think, just to end on this project, it's hard. Something that's hard to explain off people grasp, but we started with an idea and we ended up setting up 30 people. We had a Christmas party where 8 people were spa therapists and massage therapists, and we're artists, so it was very strange in that way. But through this, we were able to end up with an organisation, and so now we've largely exited the artwork, the project, but it's continued. So the therapists who came together now operate a spa themselves. And so they work every day, they do massages, they've essentially realised their dream of making their own workplace and their own job from an artistic endeavour that started it. And the project in the next year is going to be actually rebuilt as a large, fully functioning spa, which will be owned by the employees who work there. And so we've started with a kind of visual and a conceptual idea, and it's ended up with something that is going to sustain elements of it, which is obviously always hard for us as artists, because you want to maintain creative control. Go in and pull down the ugly poster, perhaps on the wall, or kind of want to have input, but actually exiting from it is as helpful to it as possible.
This is another project that we've done. Again, it's based on ways of interacting and engaging people in a meaningful way through artwork, but it's got a completely different outcome. This project is in London again, and it's in the north, in an area that's going through massive change. It's the third time this area has gone through massive change. Before, it used to be the area is called Manor House, and because there used to be loads of manors up there, but they all got knocked down in the early 20th century and replaced by large, high-rise Ukraine-type structures, and now again, because of these weren't very successful, the council is again open for development, and a load of private development is now going up, and it's turning into something more like Dubai. And within this, there is a community that is shifting around, and we wanted to try and find out how they feel about all this change, and put that into an artwork.
And so it's a strange way to do this, but our project commission was for a sculpture, and we wanted to address the issues of community and change. But also, in our brief, we were asked to do something forward-thinking that was looking to provide, I suppose, a bit of optimism linked to technology for the area. So we started looking into 3D printing, and 3D printing and community are not natural bedfellows, but we were interested in the process. So obviously, for those who don't know, 3D printing is the layering of plastics or objects through a computer file to create a final object. And people say it may transform industry and making. It might lead to a new industrial revolution where all of us at home become manufacturers, which obviously in itself is hugely relevant to global supply chains and economics, if it happens. So we had no idea about 3D printing when we started, so we went on an exploration of that technology.
And I think, we've been around Istanbul, and there's a lot of production still happening in the city. It's not like London. London's lost all its production. all its small-scale production. You go around and it's basically all housing now, and its gentrification is quite thorough. So we were just interested, I think it's particularly relevant for London, about how manufacturing can come back into the city on a small scale.
So we set off learning about 3D printing while trying to help communities, which seems strange. But we started off with a glue gun. We started building objects like a 3D printer, like a human 3D printer, out of glue, with a local school. So we worked and got them to do this process. And they produced these manually 3D printed objects. The one on the left is a pepper, and the one on the right is an ice cream. I don't know if you can get that, but these have been created just through extrusion.
So using glue guns that you often use in art at school with art and craft type structures.
And I guess this process is really for us part of getting that initial buy-in, that initial interest from people in the area. So you go out to a school, you say, look, we're doing something with technology, it's really exciting. And then they end up through that getting brought into the artistic process and telling their family and friends, and it becomes something that kind of expands from a very small, simple idea into a community of people. The thing that excited us most, though, about the opportunity to combine community and 3D printing is this idea of mass customization. That this unique technology where you press print and an object comes out means that all of the, I suppose, democratization that digital media has enabled, i.e. the sharing of files, the adaptation with software algorithms of shapes and data, can suddenly be applied to the material world. So essentially, just like with Beatles, you can have one code which is altered slightly to produce very different outcomes. With 3D printing, you can do the same essentially.
So we went to a 3D print company down in Shoreditch in Hackney, and we saw something that was down there by someone else that had done a project on Twitter, and this was each snowman represents a Twitter person, or person on Twitter, sorry, and the different outcomes from their Twitter file. So it's like, I can't remember what represented what.
I mean, the big head is with the most followers, and the small head the least.
So we were inspired by that, and we wanted to try and bring that into a project about a whole community. Okay.
And so we then sort of, again with all our projects, we try and start, what can we galvanise people around? And we created this 3D print lab space, which the local community, it was a high-tech activity based within their locality, and we both digitally, through social media, and also by going out and talking to people, we got them interested in this idea of, which we described as grow a tree in 3D, which will become apparent, and probably called it that. And the idea was essentially to say, well, if you can use this technology to work with people to capture data, essentially, capture their feelings and their thoughts about the community they're in, can we turn that into an object, and can those objects make up a sculpture? And so we came up with essentially a process, a digital process, by which people could go online in the area and could fill out and answer these questions about how they felt and about their social capital. And so these were all linked to a tree. And the reason we chose the trees is that when we spoke to people, they were very worried about the new construction was going to get rid of a lot of the nature and wildlife in the area. And so we asked these questions, which you can see here. So what colour would your tree's leaves be if you had a tree to make? Where were you born? Was it in the area or far away? How long have you lived within Manor House? And this data essentially turned into an object that you'll see now, which was mapped onto a sort of digital map of the area. So each of those people is a respondent to this artwork. So they've each taken part in a process of developing the artwork with us. They filled out the questionnaire about how they feel about their area, how often they talk to their friends, are they happy at the moment or unhappy? And this was then able to create the object you would see.
So this was, once the people had filled in the questionnaire, that was sent to the 3D printers. But before that, they were shown a tree that represented the person. They weren't, as soon as they were shown the tree, they weren't allowed to go back and adjust it, because they might not be quite happy with what tree they had. For instance, the bottom right isn't particularly inspiring. It means they're not really happy. They're not really doing much. So this was then sent on to the 3D printers, and they could then print out any tree that we sent over to them. And there was multiple outcomes. So we questioned 300 people, and each person had an individual response. I don't think there was one tree that was the same as the other. And you got different funny situations coming out that a normal questionnaire would never show, but it really showed the individual. For instance, some trees were large, which meant they were part of the community, and they had fruit on them, which meant that they were giving back to the community. But they only had 2 branches, for instance, and that said that they were unhappy. And the questionnaire would not normally be able to show this. And this is the unhappy tree.
And then they were all sent to the printer. We had a few different iterations of the visuals and the design. The sort of very strange ones, the top left, were printed out. And then we had the mammoth task of making all these objects. The nice thing for an artwork is that we can always print it out again later. So a lot of the work is done digitally in this instance. The maps were linked to where people were from. So when you filled out the questionnaire and participated, your data and your object was produced. And then we actually mapped those and hung those onto our sculpture. This is the final piece here. You can see one of the 3D printed trees there. And you'll see, particularly I think in this image, we had essentially a map or a kind of forest of trees, and every tree represented a person. And it was wonderful in the opening because the oldest person there, who was I think 89, who happened to have participated, came along and she could see her tree being the tallest, so she could point it out and spot it. And also you could start to see clusters of, I suppose, non-participating members of the community. So an area perhaps with lots of young professionals who don't engage with others, all of their trees were very, very narrow. Whereas those who lived in the area a long time and helped people out, their trees were very, very wide.
And also you can see the trees are all clustered around one area, and in the centre of that is where the community centre is. So the community centre immediately realised that they weren't branching out to the whole area of their constituency. And that was one of the main things that they took from it, that they need to branch out, go to other areas, try and engage them in the community centre, and by doing that, they'll then start filling up the rest of the sculpture. So when we left the sculpture, it wasn't done. The possibility is now for them to keep on going, keep on getting questionnaires, and making more trees and filling it up.
I think also that project is for us. One of the reasons it's, I suppose, interesting is it's just when you look at it, you can interpret it just as a sculpture. And often for us that was a change because sometimes our work is trying to hide as artwork, and this was very obviously artwork, and you had to find out more about it by, I suppose, asking those questions or interrogating the process. A project that we've been running now for 3.5 years, and it's very close to our hearts because it's one of our most interesting and most challenging projects, is called Farm Shop in Hackney. This was a response again to a question. So the question before was, how do you combine 3D printing and community? The question at the Bathhouse was, surely we can have different types of social space in the city. With Farm Shop, it was more global. It was, how can we reconnect with our food? How can we actually re-establish those relationships that have been lost? And with all of the, I suppose, the conflicting factors of urbanisation and climate change and the industrialisation of the food system, we wanted to, in our small way, come up with what felt like a sufficient response to that enabled us to feel like we were participating in that process and to provide a platform for other people to do that. And our interest in food was able to be satiated, I suppose, when we got the opportunity to take over an empty shop, which was in Hackney. And as with other projects, we started with a drawing and an idea. We're very naive, we're not experts in food, but we came up with this idea of, well, what if you can take the well-known symbol of food production, a farm, and put it within a shop, right in the city centre, right in the place where young people don't know where their food comes from, they don't know how it's been made. And this was in an area in Dalston, which is rapidly gentrifying again in London, like many of the spaces. Very, very far away from open and green space, and actually with high levels of poverty alongside high levels of wealth. And we took over an empty shop. We were given this for 1 year for free, and given a very, very small amount of money to do the artwork.
So it got funding from Art in Empty Shops, so it was a part of a larger scheme from Hackney and the whole country actually, about trying to rejuvenate high streets, because in the UK a lot of high streets the shops in high streets are closing down because of larger shopping centres outside of the city, and because of the internet, and it's a real problem in the UK about shops not being used at all. So part of it is about food, but also part of it is about how these spaces in the centre of cities can be used in an interesting way, and large businesses can't reproduce this kind of thing because for various reasons.
And we started off with, I suppose, two things. One is trying to visualise, and this was a mistake at the start, visualise what does a farm look like. We'd never really been on farms or spent time in them, and so we had our chickens on the roof up there. But then we actually started, we started planting seeds essentially. So we actually, we put out the poster you saw earlier onto a local paper, and suddenly we had a huge amount of interest around the project. This idea of putting a farm in a shop really captured people's imagination. On the first weekend of people finding out about the project, 100 people turned up to help. 100 people came on the door to take paintbrushes and to actually start to retrofit and improve the building. Now they all thought they were coming to set up a farm, not to paint a room. And so we suddenly had this question of, we better start planting seeds very, very quickly. And we planted our first set of seeds in the space, within days of people being there. People came with tools from the local area, and we ended up with a team of 20 volunteers, giving maybe 5 or 6 hours a week. A whole very diverse range of people involved, ex-drug addicts, people with mental health issues, young professionals, people from all different backgrounds were there, coalescing around this idea of feeding ourselves and of food and of essentially hacking something familiar into a farm. After lots and lots of hard work, it turned into Farm Shop, which is essentially now is sort of seen and functions as an urban agriculture hub, a place for people who are interested in urban agriculture to hang out, to share ideas, to learn, and also, it's also a design space. We're artists, we had control over the way it looks and the way it feels.
I think one of the main things as well, we wanted to design it so food was in the space, but we wanted to make sure that it was also a space for people, because food production generally is in farms and in industrial situations that people aren't able to see it, and part of the project was about people being educated and understanding where their food comes from and the realities of where their food comes from, because a lot of people don't necessarily realise that chemicals are involved in the production of their food, that they're not necessarily grown in soil, they're not necessarily grown in natural sunlight, and we wanted to show those realities. So people were coming in and didn't necessarily like what they saw, but that was an important part of it because it was about the education.
And so we went about transforming the space, and this was very much on a platform approach. So we asked people, lots of people we emailed who were farmers and doing interesting agricultural practice, and said, will you come along and work with us in this space so we can learn things? We tried out hydroponic growing, where you get water and you add a bottle of fertiliser and you get basil growing. We tried keeping cows, chickens on the roof, as you can see there. They're lovely to look after chickens and very easy if anyone would like to try.
I mean, one of the reasons that the chickens were on the roof was partly because it was north facing, so it didn't get any sun. Also, London has a lot of foxes, so it was a practical decision to put the chickens on the roof. We've since had to move them back down into the backyard of the shop because the council suddenly freaked out after 2 years. And we've had 2 sets of chickens killed by foxes since then. It's basically a little fortress now, and they're hopefully still there when we get back.
And also, I suppose, in the space where there's tension between a communal space that could be used for learning and sharing stuff and growing. So you can see here that it does function not just as a farm, and that was always the intention. Was it had to be a shared space, and it wasn't about growing lots and lots and lots of food. Very quickly we realised that it was about bringing people together around food, and that extended to our sourcing policy. So we run a cafe there, and what we do is we grow as much food as we can, but also we've connected with one farm outside of London which supplies us with our eggs, with our meat, and with other vegetables that we can't grow. And also we've had an open policy of if you're in the area and you want to bring food, bring it to us and we may buy it from you and serve it up. So again, it's about using this focal point of a building to actually generate a discussion and generate a community around it, which is much bigger than the space itself. By being involved in this for 3.5 years, we've become quite geeky about growing food, so we've actually got a lot of knowledge about it now, which has been very satisfying. And one of the things that we want to share today, because we're so excited about it, is this idea that you can replace fertiliser with fish. Okay, so instead of putting fertiliser on your fields and on your plants, you can combine fish with your plants, and actually they will produce nutrient. And this is a system called aquaponics. So you may have heard of hydroponics, but this is called aquaponics. And when you feed the fish, they produce essentially ammonia. Okay, and that ammonia would usually go out into a watercourse in a fish farm. But in our setting, it's converted by bacteria into nitrate, which is the main ingredient in the fertiliser you see there. And in combining those together, you're able to grow food very, very quickly, very, very easily, without having to put additional fertiliser in.
It's not. I mean, this looks like a new technique, but it's actually quite an old technique. They've used it in Asia for centuries in paddy fields growing rice. So in the water at the bottom of the rice field, they'd have the fish, and then every year they would break the walls around the paddy field. All the water would go out, and they would have the fish left over to eat.
And I think that when we tried this stuff out, it hadn't been seen before in London. It was the first time anyone had tried to combine fish farming and vegetable growing to make very productive, healthy food. And I think that there is something around the urban context of growing food which is important, and that's that, in cities it's been proven that people walk faster. If you live in the city, you walk faster. And perhaps, if you live in the city, you sometimes think faster. And that cities are places of great innovation and change, and that by actually addressing agriculture in the city, you start to look at new practices, better, more sustainable, more resource intensive, more community focused activities. And we've seen in London at least a huge amount of innovation around actual farming. How do you grow a mushroom in a better way, which perhaps hasn't been happening in the countryside. And I think that's a role of urban agriculture that's often forgotten, that by bringing it into this thriving space of people sharing and connecting and interacting, we'll end up with perhaps a better agriculture at the end.
And like London, like most cities around the world, all the people from the countryside are moving to London. So there is a knowledge about farms and countryside, and we do find there's a lot of people that they want to live in a city, but they also want to have a connection with food production. And it's really using that knowledge, and like I say, it's the same in every city. China, massive population moving to the cities now, and it's like tapping into that.
And in this approach, you're able to grow, very, very nice, interesting food. And we had some lovely examples of, I suppose, people hearing about the project. We had a taxi driver pull across the road very fast, and we reported that screeching outside. And the taxi driver, who was called Trevor, came in and said, "Are your fish, they're too small. I've got 20 fish in my back garden, which I sell for food in London." We had another person that was a Bangladeshi farmer who lived in London and was like, I grew up on a fish farm growing that exact type of fish. I could tell you how healthy they are and how to look after them and how to feed them. And I think that with every city which has experienced rapid rural to urban migration, there's lots of people and lots of skills out there which projects like this can unlock and can unleash. As well as the seriousness of the project, we decided to make sure we had regular nightclub nights alongside the food to get people who don't care about agriculture, who don't care about sustainability, also to come along and understand what was going on. And we never thought this would happen, but some people left and would occasionally rap about fish and lettuce. It worked. Alongside that, it became a platform for talks and for discussions about food. This is a very prominent farming expert in the UK, talking about living soil and the importance of soil in production. And as with the Bathhouse, it now, as a project, has evolved into essentially a self-sustaining, self-funding artwork. It's only ever received £5,000 of grant as a project. The rest has come from essentially it generating revenue itself and us continuing to support it as artists. And if you went there today, you would be able to interact with it as a cafe that grows its own food, where you can pick up a vegetable box, or as an experiment, as an idea, as a philosophy that underpins it. And so it's become even more embedded, I'd say, into the everyday than when it first started. There seems to almost be a natural evolution of a project from its raw state into its kind of acceptable life. Again, as well as the kind of the act of building something like this in a city which engages people in food, we've since started to look at how we can actually take this learning out into other parts of the city and other countries. This is a very productive vertical low energy farm that you can see here, using LED lighting to grow chard very, very quickly with very, very low water use, but also outside, so that when it's sunny, you get the benefits of the sunshine and the crop, and when it's cloudier, the crop continues to grow. And because we have such a small supply chain in the city, such a simple supply chain, without all the complexities of refrigeration, transport, everything else, we think perhaps there is a perfect alignment of technology, community growing, which means that it can be more sustainable and more productive than other techniques. And just finally, to end on this, is that this is one of the favourite outcomes as a project that came from Farm Shop, was working with a mental health charity to grow food for our pesto. So we make pesto in the shop, which we serve in sandwiches. And so we were able to train up people with minor psychiatric illnesses in the local area, who then started to produce and grow basil for us. You can see a lovely harvest of London-grown basil, literally only a kilometre from our shop. And these are things we want to carry on. It's not just about an artwork and the space we create, it's about the connections and the community that comes from it. That's the introduction to the projects. It's probably worth us also touching on, I guess, why we're here and how you might be able to help. Is that we're interested in essentially the fact that Istanbul is denser and bigger than the cities that we live in terms of London. So there's perhaps an even greater separation between agriculture and your daily life. You may consume food, but you don't necessarily understand how it's grown, and you certainly are unlikely to participate in that growing. And so what we're interested in doing is I guess, gauging whether there is an appetite for a type of space that brings people together who want to grow food and want to learn about farming, and also an appetite to connect with farmers, existing urban farmers in Istanbul, which we visited today, which are incredible, and also to reconnect with farmers outside the city. And so perhaps when we move to questions shortly, some of you could give us your opinions and what you think about that idea, and whether you think Istanbul's connection with its food is healthy, or if it could be improved. So, any questions?
No, good.
How long are you
Till tomorrow. But hopefully coming back. We've been here since Monday, and we've been looking at what kind of food is on sale. So we've been to some markets, as well as going to some farms. And yeah, we're just it's just initial stages, just understanding, looking at spaces that we could do the production in. But yeah, it's very early days right now.
So I moved here in August, and I think one of the biggest things that I noticed in Istanbul is the lack of green space, which obviously is connected to the Gezi Park protests and whatnot. And I'm a civil engineer. I'm an environmental and civil engineer, and one of my personal interests is green roofs. And there's so many roofs in Istanbul, and they're not utilized. If you stand on top of a building and are looking down at the city, there are practically none of them are used, and they're all flat. I don't know about the structural stability of all of them, but I wonder if you could use that concept in growing.
Yeah, I think you definitely could. I mean, they're really they're an incredible resource for a city because they usually have no value, land value attached to them. They're full of sunshine, and as long as you can get to them, they're great. So if you know of any good roofs to look at, we could.
You can come to mine.
Okay, that sounds good.
I have a roof that's not being used right now, and that's one of the things that I'd like to look into. But also, it's from an engineering perspective and an urban planning perspective, and obviously green roofs help reduce the wastewater flows, and so they help with sewage systems and whatnot. So there's also a tie there that can be explored.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that there would be. You mentioned that there was like a program for the high streets, like rehabilitation of high streets. How much other help did you get from institutions or like local councils from that? Because I could imagine there not being as much of an infrastructure, like a support infrastructure here. So maybe you could just talk about the kind of support you got from institutions or support from other like-minded people.
So the council gave us the property. We had the option of just being there for 3 months, but it would take them 3 months to build the project, so we took the option of being there for a year, and due to the success of it, the council then gave it to us for a bit longer for free, and without any rates as well at the start. And now we're on a peppercorn rate, so we just give a small amount of money to them, same as a charity, and it keeps it open. Do we pay rates?
Yeah, I mean, we pay full business rates now.
Yeah.
We pay a fairly substantial rent, not necessarily at market rates. I think we're at about 60% of market rates at the moment. So initially we got support, but now we've designed it to be a self-funding, working sort of space.
But I mean, the funding wise, we only got £5,000, and then everything else was just goodwill. So small companies that are interested in showing their products were getting involved, but also, for instance, the city, the financial district of London is just down the road, and we try to utilise that as much as possible. So bankers, for instance, the Polytunnel was funded by UBS, the bank, and they all came down and built it. And it's kind of like, we could say, oh, we don't want the UBS involved in this community project. But if the UBS didn't get involved in the project, we wouldn't have a polytunnel. So it's kind of, part of it was just being practical about it and just getting it off the ground. And who else was involved? There was various people.
I mean, I think the main thing was we didn't cost our labour at all on this project at all. We just got involved and worked on it. And we were working 7 days, weeks. We had, because we had another 20 people who were doing the same thing. Everyone was working for free. So it was about coming together around an idea and making it happen. Those people who were volunteers became staff, and so the staff is entirely made up of volunteers now. People who have previously worked on it and participated in its creation, and now it's their job, it's their life. And we've sort of exited again, so we're not as involved in the day-to-day. That's the biggest saving, is your own time is the biggest cost, often. We
did hit a bit of a zeitgeist, so we got a lot of press very quickly, and that allowed the project to push on very quickly through getting in-kind support and materials and stuff like that. It pushed it very quickly, and yeah, it hit a nerve, and that really helped the project.
We have some kind of community building since Gezi actually, and forums have also started projects like Bostan building. Have you heard about it? Like in our fruit vegetable gardens, the conventional name for these gardens, Bostan, and there are some city Bostans also. Like also Yedikule had some very traditional, many hundreds years old actually, and it was about to be. The city had hands on it, and then there was kind of resistance, but also some willingness of the local people to go along. They thought it will be modernization. But then other city people, maybe like us, were intervening and trying to save it. So there is actually some contradiction also, some conflict there. The local community may be totally also against this kind of initiatives. But I would actually be more pleased if you had any context with these new Boston establishments. This is also kind of occupation movement. I mean, occupying spaces maybe not owned by a private person, but left alone, and soon it could be sold for building. So I think we could start on that basis here in Istanbul. And of course, there are some other experiences I know of, like balcony farming or roof farming, Kent Bahçeciliği, Doğa Derneği, or some other associations have such initiatives also well documented. I can propose you 2 books, İstanbul Kent Bahçeleri, for example, from Yeni İnsan Yayınları. And if you guys are going to come back, kinds of more technology-involved approaches you introduced can be also maybe introduced by our initiatives, or some things could be picked up. I would like to be part of such of development. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That's really, it's really useful. I mean, we went to the farms today along the city wall, and we're very inspired by it, because I mean, compared to London, and I think actually probably most of Europe, there's nothing of that scale, and it's very precious to have that here. So I think whatever we do would be integrating and linking with that, but we need to learn more about it. So maybe next time you can we can meet and you can show us, and that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one is that most of the designers in the world, they're only serving to the elite of people. Like, I think only 5% of them are working like against poverty or making poor people's life easier. So I'm asking a personal questions. How come you wanted to design these things together, like helping the poor and underdog with your designing skills? So, and because I think it's like 2% of the designers are just helping, like in Africa, helping the creating devices in order to clean water, or this kind of stuff. This is the first question. I'm sure you thought about this.
Yeah.
And the second is that Istanbul is using its neighboring city's water. It's really dense, highly populated, and I'm sure the food is also coming out of the city, so it's not enough. And then in the world, there's a trend that these capitalist cities, neoliberal policies, so it's not really human-friendly, like in Los Angeles or in São Paulo. So they are not feeding itself, so it has to come from outside. So your movement with it, and then also we know that 50% of the food grown in the field is not reaching the table, it's wasted. And there are, I mean, from documentaries I know in San Francisco, they are doing this urban gardening. And then in Europe, my friends also are starting to do these things. And I think in Istanbul right now as well. So do you see there's this neoliberal city urban planning happening in like globally, everywhere in China, Turkey, in Brazil, in the United States. And there's also this dumpster diving thing, and then there's this urban gardening. Do you see, how do you situate yourself in this bigger movement? I mean, how do you see yourself against these neoliberal policies of the world? Do you think it's the reaction, or how do you define it? Thank you.
I think on the second question first is I think we do see ourselves as part of that, but I think also we work with what we've got. You know, we have to be quite pragmatic in our approach. And so the way that we've managed to get projects off the ground in London is usually from public. It's usually from public funding, giving the essence and the start of an idea, and then it kind of moving out from there. But I think food has to be at the heart of any kind of reimagination of the economy and the economic system. And that if you look at, perhaps we're at the almost the end point of capitalism in a place like London. And in more emerging economies where you still have agrarian economies, you have perhaps economies rooted more in the small and the everyday in terms of your production and stuff. You're on that journey, and I think it's probably the most painful part, is that there is such property-led development of Istanbul at the moment. We can see of land being taken from people and given to corporations and the like. I think we've never claimed to have achieved much change to those global structures. But personally, previously I was involved in activism, and going to G8 protests and things like this, and I find it more soul-affirming doing practical, actual projects to try to address these issues. I think both together is the best. You know, to protest as a group, but also to doing projects, actual physical changes to your own environment in a small way.
I guess we like this sort of mission statement of social and environmental projects. It gives you a kind of direction about where you're going. You understand there is some use to the project. Like we're just not particularly interested at all in doing product like designing another chair, for instance. We're not really interested in that. We don't really. There's plenty of good chairs out there. We don't need to do another one. And we try to tap into what doesn't exist and try to twist things that are familiar so people can have a relationship with it, and but bring them up another step and bring them into another reality. And that reality might be surreal, but it's also could be the reality of the future. We try to bring the two together.
Did that answer the question?
Very.
Any other questions?
Hello. After your excursion today during the wall, what do you start to think, and which kind of scale you would like to improve in the city? Like maybe you is inspired of this gardening, farming places, but if you are interested in activism, involvement, and interaction, so maybe you would like to improve a place in the city center exactly, and maybe just like a mobile system or like a pop-up project, which take the attention from the people, like in this diverse population in Istanbul. Maybe one of the best streets at İstiklal Street, or I don't know, in a neighborhood, like occupation that she mentioned in the Asian side or the Europe side. So which kind of scale exactly we are talking about now?
I think we're talking about something of a small scale, but with a high impact, ideally, which does create a place for people to meet who are interested in these issues and stimulates a discussion. I think for now that's all we hope we could achieve, but I do think the starting point also has to be the protection and support of what is already here, to actually help people to understand the value, you know, both economic and social, that a city farm and the existing city farms can provide. And if you can get people excited and feeling positively about those, then I think that will be good enough for us now.
And it feels like Istanbul it's a tipping point. It really feels like it could go either way right now. It's still got that infrastructure, like along the city walls. It's still got that, but doesn't seem particularly protected. Like one side at the start of the wall where we went there today, one side is green, the other side has got a load of rubble on top of it, but used to be green, and that was only 15 years ago. And it's kind of in London that was lost 100 years ago, and it's kind of so for us it's quite exciting that it's still there, you know, and this project can help raise awareness, but also help support them as well in some way.
I mean, it's a very strange world when in the US you have a recent urban farming project which is maybe a tenth of the size of the farming capacity you have already in Istanbul, raises £14 million of venture capital investment. You know, it's seen as the future. It's seen as something which is investable and worthwhile, part of this new green cities. Yet in Istanbul now you have maybe some housing being built on it in competition. And so I think also new typologies. It's a very dense city you have here, very, very dense. And I wonder if the integration of farming into the housing designs is also a route forward. So if you have a need for housing, low-cost apartment blocks being built on space, maybe the space does need to move upwards, like we heard earlier, as part of that process. I mean, I have a quick question for everybody, which you probably don't want to take part in, but you have to. How many people here grow food at home now? Okay, 4 or 5. That's good. I mean, we've not seen much walking around. We haven't seen. If you go to Korea, for example, you see.
Near home is okay.
Near home's fine, yeah.
Yeah.
This guy is. I mean, I think also it's to do what you can yourselves. You know, in Korea we went, and every balcony, someone is growing food. You know, it's very much every small bit of space is being guerrilla gardened. You have chilies on the street. You know, it's a very different way of doing things. So I think there's different scales you can work at. You can do big urban farms. You can create discussion points, which is what we probably are best at. And then also you yourselves go out and start growing things.
Thank you. I think we have no more questions. Yeah, we do.
It's actually a comment, not a question. Istanbul has the worst traffic problem in the world, you know. So people are spending all their time either working or trying to get to their house or office. So there's no time for making a project in Istanbul. Space-wise and time-wise. That's a big problem. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.